Imagine a weapon sharper than surgical steel, carved from the femur of a giant beast, yet wielded by humans who had never seen metal. For thousands of years before the Bronze Age, before iron, before civilization as we know it, our ancestors were crafting instruments of death so precise they could pierce through hide armor in a single thrust. But the world of prehistoric bone weaponry holds far more than crude clubs and primitive tools. Buried deep in Siberian permafrost, archaeologists have uncovered bone daggers with serrated edges that rival modern combat knives. In European caves, spear points carved from mammoth ivory still bear the bloodstains of prey and predators from 40,000 years ago. These weren't desperate improvisations. They were engineering marvels, designed with anatomical knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Renaissance. What's most chilling? Some of these weapons were crafted from human bones, trophies of warfare or tools of ritual combat, steeped in mystery and carved into the very foundation of human civilization. Today, we'll uncover 6 of the most lethal bone weapons from prehistoric times, each one more sophisticated than the last. And the first one? It was designed specifically to kill other humans. 1. The bone dagger of the Ice Age hunter. The frozen body lay face down in the Austrian Alps for 5,300 years. When hikers discovered Otzi the Iceman in 1991, they found something unexpected clutched near his side. A dagger with a flint blade, yes, but also backup weapons carved entirely from bone. This wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the precision. Because here's what anthropologists discovered when they examined Ice Age campsites across Europe. Bone daggers weren't primitive at all. They were specialized. Some were thin and needle-like, designed to slip between ribs. Others had broad, leaf-shaped blades that could cause massive bleeding. The bone itself came from specific animals: red deer, reindeer, even cave bear, chosen for density and flexibility. But why bone when stone was available? Here's the twist: stone shatters, bone bends. When you're hunting woolly mammoth or defending yourself against a Neolithic raider, you need a weapon that won't break on impact. And bone had another advantage: it could be sharpened to an edge finer than obsidian. Scientists testing replica bone daggers found they could slice through ballistic gel with terrifying efficiency. Now, the manufacturing process reveals something darker about our ancestors. To create these daggers, prehistoric craftsmen had to understand skeletal anatomy intimately. They knew which bones were hollow, which were dense, which could be split lengthwise, and which had to be shaped whole. They were essentially performing bone surgery on animals they'd killed, sometimes on enemies they'd defeated. Archaeological sites in France show evidence of bone daggers being resharpened over and over, the handles worn smooth from decades of use. These weren't disposable tools. They were heirlooms, passed down through generations. And forensic analysis of Neolithic skeletons reveals something chilling. Bone dagger wounds in human remains, healed over, suggesting people survived attacks and lived with the knowledge that next time, they might not be so lucky. But bone daggers were just close-range weapons. Our ancestors needed something that could kill from a distance, and the next weapon changed hunting forever. 2. The barbed harpoon of the Arctic hunters. Picture the Arctic tundra 15,000 years ago. A lone hunter stands on an ice floe, the water black and churning below. A seal surfaces, and in one fluid motion, the hunter launches a spear. But this isn't just any spear. The tip is carved from walrus bone, and it's covered in backward-facing barbs, each one painstakingly notched by hand. When that harpoon enters flesh, it doesn't come out. That's the genius. The barbed bone harpoon represents one of humanity's first smart weapons. Unlike a simple spear point that might glance off blubber or pull free when an animal thrashes, barbed harpoons were designed with reverse psychology for flesh. The barbs, sometimes 5, sometimes 20, carved into the bone at precise angles, acted like biological fish hooks. The harder the prey pulled, the deeper they dug in. But here's where it gets fascinating. These weren't just hunting tools. Archaeologists working in Norway discovered a 10,000-year-old skeleton with a barbed bone harpoon lodged in its pelvis. The wound had partially healed, meaning the victim survived the initial attack but lived with a bone weapon fragment inside them for weeks or months. Forensic analysis suggests the harpoon was designed for war, not whaling, smaller, lighter, optimized for piercing human enemies. The manufacturing process was brutal. Arctic peoples would harvest walrus or narwhal bone, then spend hours scraping away the outer layer to reveal the dense inner structure. Using stone burins, essentially prehistoric engraving tools, they'd carve each barb individually, testing the angle against seal hide to ensure maximum holding power. A single harpoon could take 3 days to complete. And if you broke it during the hunt, you were weaponless in one of the harshest environments on Earth. What's remarkable is the cultural spread. Nearly identical barbed bone harpoons have been found in Alaska, Greenland, Siberia, and even Japan, separated by thousands of miles of open ocean. Either these designs evolved independently, or prehistoric peoples were trading knowledge and weapons across distances we assumed they couldn't travel. But before moving on, I would like to ask you for something. If you like these documentaries and want to support me, please consider subscribing. It's free. Now, the harpoon's legacy didn't end in the Stone Age. Modern whaling harpoons still use barbed designs, and military frogmen use similar concepts in underwater spear guns. Our ancestors invented a weapon so efficient that 15,000 years later, we're still using the same principles. But barbed harpoons were for distance. The next weapon was designed for something more intimate and more terrifying. 3. The bone club with embedded teeth. In the rainforests of Papua New Guinea, anthropologists in the 1930s documented something that made them reconsider everything they thought they knew about prehistoric warfare. Indigenous warriors carried clubs carved from cassowary leg bones, massive, dense, and powerful enough to shatter a human skull. But what made these weapons truly nightmarish were the additions. Shark teeth, embedded into grooves along the striking edge. This wasn't a modern innovation. It was ancient technology, dating back over 10,000 years. Because when archaeologists started excavating coastal sites across the Pacific, they found bone clubs with similar modifications everywhere. Polynesian warriors used clubs edged with stingray barbs. Aboriginal Australians embedded kangaroo teeth into hardwood and bone handles. Mesoamerican cultures created macuahuitl-style clubs with obsidian blades set into bone frames. The pattern was global. Humans independently discovered that bone alone was good, but bone plus teeth was devastating. Here's why this combination was so effective. A solid bone club delivers blunt force trauma, broken bones, concussions, internal bleeding. But add teeth or sharp edges, and suddenly you're causing compound fractures and lacerations simultaneously. Medical examiners studying prehistoric remains found skulls with impact patterns consistent with toothed clubs. A crushing blow surrounded by deep cuts, as if the victim had been both bludgeoned and slashed in a single strike. The construction required intimate knowledge of adhesives. Prehistoric peoples used pine resin, animal fat, and plant gums to secure teeth into bone grooves, creating bonds that lasted centuries. Some clubs found in burial sites still had their teeth intact after 5,000 years underground. Experimental archaeologists trying to replicate these weapons found that the adhesive had to be mixed in exact ratios. Too brittle and it cracked, too soft and the teeth came loose during impact. But here's the disturbing part. Many of these clubs were decorated, carved with faces, painted with ochre, wrapped in woven fibers. They weren't just weapons, they were status symbols, ceremonial objects, representations of power. A warrior carrying a tooth-studded bone club was making a statement. I have killed sharks, I have killed enemies, and I have the skill to combine their power. And in some cultures, the teeth came from defeated foes. Human teeth, embedded in bone handles, turned weapons into psychological warfare. Imagine facing an enemy whose club was made from the bones and teeth of your captured relatives. That's not just a weapon, that's a message. But clubs were for close combat, brutal and personal. The next weapon changed the calculus entirely. It let you kill without ever being seen. 4. The bone-tipped atlatl dart. The Spanish conquistadors invading Mexico in the 1520s described a weapon that seemed almost supernatural. Indigenous warriors would use a stick to throw spears. Except these weren't spears, they were darts, and they flew with such force that they punched through steel breastplates. Hernan Cortés himself wrote that these projectiles were more effective than crossbow bolts. What the Spanish had encountered was the atlatl, a spear thrower with bone-tipped projectiles, and it had been killing efficiently for 30,000 years. Because here's what makes the atlatl bone dart so deadly: physics. A human arm can throw a spear at about 60 miles per hour. Add an atlatl, essentially a lever that extends your arm's length, and suddenly that same dart is traveling at 90 miles per hour. The bone tip concentrates all that kinetic energy into a point smaller than a pencil eraser. The result? Penetration depth that exceeded anything until the invention of gunpowder. Archaeologists testing replica atlatl darts against period-accurate armor found that bone tips outperformed stone and even bronze in certain conditions. Bone doesn't shatter on impact with hard surfaces. It splinters, creating secondary wound channels that cause massive internal damage. A mammoth hunter hitting a shoulder blade wouldn't lose their projectile to fracture. The bone tip would crack but continue driving forward, sliding between ribs to reach vital organs. But the engineering is where it gets fascinating. Prehistoric craftsmen discovered that different bones produced different flight characteristics. Dense leg bones created heavy, armor-piercing darts for close range. Hollow bird bones made ultralight darts that could sail 200 yards with accuracy. Some cultures even created composite tips, layering different bone types to optimize both weight and penetration. The binding technology was equally sophisticated. To attach a bone tip to a wooden shaft, hunters used sinew wrapping soaked in hide glue, which would shrink as it dried, creating a grip stronger than the wood itself. Some darts featured breakaway tips. The bone point would detach inside the wound while the shaft fell away, making the injury nearly impossible to treat. Archaeological evidence suggests this wasn't accidental. It was designed that way, a prehistoric version of armor-piercing ammunition. What's haunting is the scale of production. At some Clovis-era sites in North America, archaeologists have found bone workshops containing thousands of dart tips in various stages of completion. This wasn't casual hunting equipment. This was industrial-scale weapons manufacturing, 13,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. Someone was organizing labor, training specialists, stockpiling arsenals. And we know these weren't just for hunting game. Mass graves from the late Pleistocene contain skeletons with atlatl dart wounds, clean punctures through vertebrae, shattered skulls with bone tips still embedded, rib cages pierced from front to back. The atlatl wasn't just a hunting revolution. It was a military revolution, one that let small groups kill at range with precision. But all these weapons required skill, training, time to deploy. The next one was designed for pure speed, and it came from the most unexpected source. 5. The sharpened bone awl as assassination weapon. In a burial mound in Denmark, archaeologists found a 5,000-year-old skeleton with a peculiar wound. A puncture mark in the base of the skull, precisely placed where the spinal cord enters the brain. The murder weapon was still there. A sharpened bone awl, no longer than a pen, driven upward through the soft tissue of the neck. This wasn't a weapon of war. It was a weapon of murder. Because while bone clubs and harpoons get the attention, bone awls were perhaps the most sinister tools of the prehistoric arsenal. An awl is essentially a needle, pointed, slender, designed for piercing leather in leatherworking. But sharpen it to a surgical point, and you have something that can slip between ribs without touching bone, puncture a kidney without leaving more than a pinhole wound, or, as in the Danish case, sever the brainstem instantly. What makes awls terrifying is their dual purpose. They're so common in archaeological sites that researchers barely notice them anymore. Every prehistoric settlement has dozens, used for sewing hides, making rope, boring holes in shells for jewelry. But forensic analysis of skeletal remains keeps revealing all wounds in places that can't be accidental. Punctures under the jaw, holes in the inner eye socket, wounds consistent with restraint and execution rather than combat. The Romans called them misericord, mercy daggers, used to deliver quick deaths to wounded knights. But prehistoric peoples had the same concept thousands of years earlier. Viking-age graves contain bone awls placed deliberately next to the body, some with the tips broken off, suggesting they'd been used so forcefully they snapped inside someone. Here's what's particularly unsettling. Awls leave almost no trace on bone unless they hit directly. Stab someone in the heart with a bone awl, and the skeleton shows nothing. Researchers suspect that many mysterious deaths in prehistoric populations, skeletons with no obvious trauma, might actually be all murders that went undetected. It's the perfect assassination weapon. Silent, concealable, and in a world where everyone carries leatherworking tools, completely unremarkable. But the sophistication goes further. Some awls were carved from human bone, femurs, tibias, ribs. Microscopic analysis reveals deliberate selection of specific bone types for specific purposes. Thin awls from bird bones for precision work. Thick awls from bear bones for punching through heavy leather. And human bone awls? Their purpose remains debated, but they appear most often in ritual contexts, burials, sacrificial sites, locations where violence and ceremony intersected. Experimental archaeologists sharpening replica awls found something disturbing. With proper technique, a bone awl can be pushed through human flesh using only thumb pressure. No stabbing motion, no overhead swing, just steady, quiet pressure, and the point slides in. In a crowded room, in darkness, in close quarters, you'd never see it coming. But awls were for subtlety. The final weapon was designed for something else entirely: raw, primal intimidation. 6. The human bone flute weapon hybrid. In a cave in Germany, archaeologists discovered an object that defied categorization. It was carved from a human femur, hollowed out with precise holes drilled along its length. Clearly a musical instrument, a flute that could produce haunting melodies. But one end had been sharpened to a point, and microscopic analysis revealed impact damage consistent with striking flesh. This wasn't a flute. Or rather, it wasn't just a flute. It was a weapon that could sing before it killed. Because the most disturbing bone weapons weren't always the most practical. They were the ones designed to terrorize. And across multiple continents, archaeologists keep finding the same pattern. Hollow bones modified to produce sound, but also modified to harm. Tibetan ritual daggers carved from femurs with finger holes for notes. Pacific Islander war clubs that whistled when swung. Mesoamerican bone rasps that could scrape out rhythm, or scrape across an enemy's face. The psychological warfare aspect is what makes these weapons unique. Imagine being a rival clan, hearing flute music echoing through the forest at night, and knowing that the last village to hear that sound was found butchered at dawn. The weapon becomes secondary to the terror it announces. Some anthropologists believe these instruments were used in pre-battle rituals specifically to unnerve opponents. The sound of human bone playing music, a reminder that you too might become an instrument. But the craftsmanship reveals something deeper about prehistoric cognition. To create a functional flute, you need to understand acoustics, how air vibrates, how hole placement affects pitch, how bone thickness changes resonance. Then, to weaponize it without destroying its musical properties, you need to understand structural integrity. These weren't random modifications. They were engineered compromises, optimizing for both sound and violence. The human bone aspect adds another layer. In some cultures, using enemy bones as instruments was the ultimate domination, not just killing your foe, but making their remains serve you, forcing them to create beauty even in death. In other cultures, it was reverence, using the bones of respected ancestors, letting their essence accompany warriors into battle through sound and steel. Forensic analysis of these hybrid weapons shows use-wear patterns consistent with both playing and striking. The same grooves worn smooth by fingertips during musical performance also show impact marks from hitting hard surfaces. These objects had dual lives, transitioning seamlessly from ceremonial instrument to lethal weapon depending on context. And here's the final, chilling detail. Many of these flute weapons have been found in children's graves. Not as burial goods, but as the apparent cause of death. Blunt force trauma to small skulls, positioned next to bone flutes with bloodstains still visible in the hollow cavity. The implication is almost too dark to process, that in some prehistoric societies, these instruments might have been used in ritual sacrifice, the last sound a child heard being music played on human bone, followed by the impact of that same bone ending their life. It's a reminder that bone weapons weren't just technology. They were extensions of belief systems, cultural values, and the human capacity for both creation and destruction. We carved beauty and death from the same material, sometimes in the same object. For 200,000 years, bone was humanity's steel, sharper than stone, more flexible than wood, available wherever prey fell. These 6 weapons represent just a fraction of the prehistoric arsenal, but they reveal something profound. Our ancestors weren't primitive. They were innovators, engineers, and tacticians who understood materials science, human anatomy, and psychological warfare long before those terms existed. The next time you see a bone in a museum display, remember, that wasn't just biology. That was potential. And in the hands of a skilled craftsman 20,000 years ago, it was absolutely lethal. If you enjoyed uncovering these forgotten weapons of the ancient world, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the history they don't teach in textbooks.